So I read somewhere that apparently BookTube doesn't really care for classics, but guess what? I'm gonna make a video about it anyway. The thing with classics is that it doesn't matter where you're from or what your orientation in life might be, you're going to find things in there that are problematic, so you need to make your peace with that first and foremost. If you can do that, then here are 5 classics that I think everyone should read. And bonus, they're by women. I'm being the change that I want to see. First up is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë, which is a novel that I actually kind of despise. So you might ask yourself, if you hate a novel so much, why would you recommend that other people read it? And I will tell you why. It is because the prose in this novel is perhaps some of the best that I've ever read. She does these things with descriptions, especially of nature, that are so distinct and outrageously beautiful that I can sometimes not believe my eyes, and I need to go back and reread passages. This is in fact one of the very few books that I will stop and reread out aloud, just so that I can hear the sounds of the words as she's using them. In fact, Wuthering Heights is perhaps the main reason why I wanted to visit Haworth and I wanted to go to Yorkshire, because I couldn't believe a place that beautiful existed. Like, I've read various descriptions of Yorkshire before, but the way she writes it, it's dramatic and dark and wild, and you get this sense that it's a place where literally anything might happen, or else that it's a place where people walk around with storms raging in their hearts. And you go to Yorkshire and that's not really how it is up there. To be honest, Haworth is actually a very nice, very sleepy little village where everyone's sort of devoted to a cottage industry around the Brontes, but the moors are just as beautiful as she describes them, and you get a sense of how eerie they are, and you can only imagine what it must be like on a moonlit night. We didn't really go out on the moors in the middle of the night because we didn't want to die, but I can imagine. The price, however, for dealing with all this gorgeousness is that you must also deal with the characters in this book, who are the literal worst. Emily Brontë was basically around 18 when she wrote this novel, and you can tell because literally every single person in this novel can only exist in the imagination of an overwrought 18-year-old who was raised in a tiny house that overlooked a cemetery and was cut off from human interaction with pretty much everybody except her siblings. However, this is a novel that gets sent to the best of lists every so often. Anytime you have the 100 greatest books in literature, blah, 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 you will find Emily Bronte's name up there and this novel in there because it is a stunning feat of literature. And if you can, you should read it at least once in your life, just so that you know what all the fuss is about. Next up, I'm going to recommend Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. So Mary Shelley, for those of you who don't know, had a famously troubled personal life. I mean, her mother died when she was born, and she was the very famous Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote one of the earliest pieces of feminist literature, and then she was raised by her father, who was a philosopher and very famous in his own right. But eventually she felt neglected and she ran away from home with the already married Percy Shelley, who's a very famous poet, and she ended up in Italy, pregnant, unmarried, with Percy Shelley and his ragtag friends, including Lord Byron, and they held a writing competition. And in this company of writers and poets, and just incredible writers and poets who continue to exert their influence on English literature today, Mary Shelley, at the age of 18, or maybe 17 even, wrote Frankenstein, which is a book that she says she dreamt as a nightmare. And it was such a work of stunning genius and so wholly original that even her husband and his friends were like, yeah, you know what? You totally win. At its heart, it's about this need for love and acceptance. the creature in the tale is actually starved for affection and for companionship. And it looks towards its father, who is the scientist that created it, Dr. Frankenstein. But the father is so horrified by what he has wrought that he only seeks first to hide it, then to destroy it. And you can sort of psychoanalyze and see the parallels with Mary Shelley's own sad life, where, she's asking for affection and acceptance from her father, and her father basically disowns her. Well, first he neglects her, and then he disowns her. It is so stunningly personal when you really get into it, and it is a story that I think has never quite gone out of style, because it speaks to a very human need, a very basic human need for love and acceptance. I know I need it, I bet you need it too. The true horror in this story, according to me, is not that the creature is awful to look at and is threatening the lives of everyone that Frankenstein loves. It's that the creature is so alone. And that is the real feat of this novel. It makes you sympathize, if not outright empathize, with this construct, this terrifying construct. And she did it at age 17. Come on. You can read it and then you can come back and yell at me if you don't like it. Next up is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which is a book that I bet a great many of you have already read. Now, Pride and Prejudice is not my favorite Austen novel. But what it is excellent social commentary, and again, this is something that hasn't gone out of style. Marriage, social position, deceit amongst your acquaintances, the navigation of relationships. These are all issues that continue to keep us enthralled in our lives and in our literature. There's a reason why Pride and Prejudice is so famous and has been remade into a variety of settings. It was remade into an American version and was remade into a Canadian setting. There's a Pakistani version. There's definitely a bunch of Indian versions. It's been adapted onto TV and to film in a number of countries by different cultures because it talks about such universal ideas. And it really is worth your going back and reading this particular novel just to understand where it comes from. And Austen honestly is fire. That woman wrote with such wit and such precision. She is hilarious and she is terrifying. I would have been on tenterhooks if she had been around me because I would have been like, what is she observing about me? I do love her and I do like this book. It's not that I don't like this book, but I just feel like it says so much about us and it says some things that honestly I don't like. So Darcy as a hero for me is quite problematic for a bunch of reasons that I'll probably discuss at some length in a later video, but I feel like there's a really good discussion to be had why Darcy is the romantic ideal for so many people. And when you read the character of Darcy within the context of this book, the original book, it talks about class in a way that I think illuminates the problem in ways that subsequent reimaginings don't. My next recommendation is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I will preface this by saying that this is not a book for people who want plot or action. The entire book revolves around character work. I first read this in college and I'll be honest, it was really difficult for me to wrap my head around it. The technique that Woolf uses in this novel, which is set almost entirely within the interior psychology of her characters, it is so innovative and different that if you go into this without knowing anything about the book, it takes you a little while to adjust. But the things that she does with technique, the way she uses prose to move from like one point of view to another, and the way she builds the narrative, it is a tremendous feat of the English language, and I really recommend it to anybody out there, especially those who are writers. There is a fluidity of consciousness that is very difficult to describe in words, But I will say that this is a book that I have returned to over the years. Like, every few years I'll pick it up and I'll discover something new about it. I'll see something that she's done, and it'll take me a while to understand exactly what she has done and how she has done it. And there are things about this book that I still don't understand, and I don't mean in terms of prose, I mean in terms of technique. But even as a reader, there are so many layers to this novel, and it is just fascinating. If Virginia Woolf had written nothing else and this was the only novel that she ever wrote, her name would have been counted amongst the greats. But the thing is, she's written so many more amazing things. But this one, to me, is the star standout. And my very last recommendation for the day is Anne of Green Gables by Maud Montgomery. This is one of those novels that I would just assume that everybody has read, and if you're Canadian, probably you and everybody you know has read it. But it is one of my favorites, and I recommend it to everybody, not just people who have kids or missed out on reading children's literature. I recommend this to adults as well. I mean, if you're reading YA, then why can't you be reading this? Again, this is a book that is set in a very particular time period and in a setting that might not exist anymore. I mean, I don't know what rural Canada looks like these days, but I'm going to imagine that you have proper public schools and that you don't take in orphans to do labor around the farms. I hope so anyway. But this book is so wholesome, and you don't get to read a lot of books, especially these days, that are just doggone wholesome. Anne as this red-headed orphan who falls for the boy next door who grows up to be a doctor, and then they have a bunch of kids, and the kids are nice, and people have problems, but the community comes together and everything works out for the best. Her kids go off to war. I mean, you have a sense of time passing and history changing, but you also get to see this very small life, but it is a well-lived life. I read this when I was a child and I was sick in bed and I couldn't get out of bed for about 3 months, and it was not a good time for me, and I read this and it immediately transported me to happier places. Now obviously you might not feel about this series the way I do, but so many people do. So if you've never checked it out, I feel like you should probably check it out at least once. And then if you don't like it, or if you hate it, or if you think it's just nonsense, that's fair. But honestly, every single book that I've talked about in this video are books that I don't just enjoy, but are books that have changed my life in one way or another. And I think that quality is what makes them a classic. Not their effect on me personally, but the fact that they can affect so many people and touch them so deeply over generations. That's what makes a classic more than, any list, any authority, any college course. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.